One night, a little over 20 years ago now, while I was a teenager, I was out with a few rowdy friends in an old muscle car, hot rodding up and down North First in Abilene, Texas, looking for a fight. Learned a tough lesson that night, and if you'll let it sink in today, it can completely change how every one of us here reacts to and tries to work through complex problems. And that lesson applies whether we're tackling problems as individuals, whether we're working in small teams, or even if we're tackling problems as large communities. And that lesson applies to the problems we face in our jobs, as well as our personal lives. And it even explains a lot of the behaviors that we see in today's social and political climates. Okay, so to set the stage here, right? I'm very thankful for the fact that I was able to grow up in one of a number of small, rural, West Texas towns that were dotted around the Abilene area. And I'm very happy to share with all of you here. I was able to experience my teenage years during the late 90s. It was a great time to grow up, mainly because we didn't have smartphones to record every crazy thing we said or did. But that also meant that if you wanted to get a hold of one of your friends and you couldn't get a hold of them, all you could do was just go out. Hope you ran into them at a public hangout like a mall, or in a lot of cases, a popular street drag like North First in Abilene, Texas, where teenagers without any more definite plans would migrate to, cruise up and down this long street, seeing who else was out, grab some fast food, and then hang out in the parking lots of strip malls that had closed up for the night. And by the way, it's those same empty strip mall parking lots where a lot of us settled our scores. So this one night during the summer, a friend of mine had heard a rumor that a girl we all knew had the night before been physically assaulted by her boyfriend. We were infuriated by this, as we should have been. This was a classmate of ours. And we all agreed that any abuse needed to be put to a stop and never happen again. But for some reason, we all decided the best way to accomplish that was for us to get involved. By going out and finding this guy, probably hanging out there on North First, fighting him, and presumably hurting him badly enough that he never thought about doing this again. Okay, now, as an adult looking back at all of this, I'm embarrassed by this line of reasoning, and for a long list of reasons, most of which we're talking about right now. Even at the time, I was the last person anyone in my town would have imagined flying off looking for a fight like this. But I remember at the time thinking this made perfect sense. My friends and I all thought that physical assault against anyone was one of these rare, unforgivable acts that, ironically, always made allowance for another round of violence and even required another round of violence to set right. So wrong or right, a few hours later, I've got three of my rowdiest friends crammed into this old 1979 Firebird Trans Am. And God, I remember this night so well. We're cruising down Interstate 20 towards Abilene, listening to this old Chris Ledoux rodeo music. And I'm talking to this great group of guys about how great it felt to have a hard week of work behind us, and more than anything, about how we weren't the types of guys to go out looking for a fight. Not at all. It was just certain situations like this one that just left us with no choice. So as we got closer to Abilene, we changed out that old rodeo music for some AC/DC, some high-energy rock and roll, just getting ourselves amped up for what we knew was coming. And as we got into Abilene and turned over these bumpy old railroad tracks, as soon as we pulled into the drag on North First, I remember seeing this big group of people hanging out in a parking lot. Thinking our guy was probably in there, we go screeching in, revving the engine, rock music blaring, jumping out of the car, making hard stares at everybody, just looking for our guy. So finally, some guy in the crowd asked, "Who are you boys looking to fight, and what the hell did they do to you?" And we take the opportunity to explain to this entire crowd who we're after and why. And this same guy jumps off the bed of his truck and he says, "Y'all are right. That can't be allowed to continue," which means someone here is going to have to find this guy and fight him. And just like that, we had this entire crowd on our side, taking us at our word about the situation and fired up to follow our course of action. And we spent probably the next half hour hanging out with this group of people talking about how we weren't the types of people to go out looking for trouble, but then sharing all kinds of great stories about how situations like this just left us with no choice. A few minutes after we had all split up to go looking for this guy, I remember having that very similar philosophical exchange with another group of guys in a 4x4 at a red light. And as the night wore on, with us recruiting more and more groups of people to our course of action, I remember something had really started to bother me. And the next stop we made, I chose to just sit in the car, and for arguably the first time that night, I started to actually think. What had started to bother me was wondering why we were so confident that fighting this guy would do anything to fix the actual problem. How did we know it wouldn't make the original problem even worse? Like, if this guy found out half the town was now out looking for him and took his frustrations out on this girl, the only real victim in all of this, by the way, and put her at more risk before she was able to decide how she wanted to react to this situation herself. And I've started to wonder if we weren't making all new problems for ourselves. Like if we got into it with this guy and it cleared out before the Abilene police got a hold of us. And by the way, I did finally stop to consider, we didn't even know at this point whether the abuse had actually taken place. Spoiler alert, we found out the next week at school it had not. It was nothing more than a rumor made up out of jealousy by some other party. And what I suddenly realized, even that night, was if what we really wanted was to find out if any abuse had taken place, and if so, put a stop to it, that was easy to do. All we had to do was pick up a phone. Call this girl, or in worst case, her family, or a teacher or coach. One phone call would put a stop to all of this, would give us all of the outcomes we were hot rodding around telling everyone we wanted without any of the drama or any of the risks. And so I got hung up with trying to understand how we had overlooked such a simple solution. And what I finally had to admit to myself that night is that we weren't really out there to help this girl, or even to address the problem in any meaningful way. What we were really doing out there that night was using the problem itself, or even just the possibility of the problem, as a stage. We were using the possibility of this girl's problem as a stage to act out a dramatic expression of our identities. In this case, as reluctant warriors of justice, and to play up those identities for a supportive audience that was more than happy to reinforce aspects of their own identities. But the worst part about this, the hardest thing for me to acknowledge, and probably why it took 20 years, was realizing that no matter what our intentions had been, that night we had become nothing more than a bunch of overly dramatic troublemakers out desperately trying to justify and build up excitement for a fight that never needed to happen. All because of this subconscious drive to project our identities. That's the idea I came out here tonight to share with all of you. We've known that emotions can have a huge impact on our thinking and behaviors. What we need to add to that awareness is that our identities act as powerful amplifiers for all of those emotions. So while it's difficult enough to work through a problem where people are getting emotional, once anyone brings their identity into the mix, it quickly becomes a no-win situation for everyone involved. The reason this happens is throughout our lives, we're building up these idealistic images of ourselves. They're tied to our self-esteem. So when we act them out, we feel good. Our brains actually reward us with a shot of feel-good brain chemicals. Biochemically speaking, playing out our identities is a very rewarding and addictive pastime. And that's why we're constantly getting our identities and all of the emotions that come with them attached to so many different issues without ever realizing it. We'll even push our way into problems that have nothing to do with us, that we know nothing about, just because they give us these stages to act out. And the real problem is our brains will keep rewarding us, even if we're not actually helping the problem. It could even play out that we end up sabotaging what would have otherwise been a successful resolution to a problem that's negatively affecting us, our customers, or even our friends, family. But because of the way our brains keep rewarding us, even after we've been the ones to steer everything over a cliff, we still feel completely vindicated. It's one thing to look back and admit that your emotions got the better of you. I think most of us here have probably had to do that. But it is something else entirely to admit to yourself, much less the world, that you've been wrong about something that you've anchored your very identity to. All of this is even more challenging for us in today's world because now we have social media. And what is social media besides a grand digital stage where we can all react to content in ways that projects our identities out to an unlimited audience? All while an algorithm picks up on those details and sends back a very carefully curated feed of content meant to trigger our identities, spiking our emotions even further and distorting our thinking, reasoning, and motivations in all of the ways we just talked about while we're shaping our understanding of the news and all of the world's problems. Do we really think that an algorithm designed to trigger our identities, to sell us ads, is ever going to be a reliable digital town square to understand and solve problems as a large community? All of this comes to a head in today's political climates. Because in today's world, if a politician wants our money, our support, our votes, they don't even pretend to offer real solutions to real problems. They just use any problem, real or invented, as a stage. And then they act out in ways that trigger our identities. Real solutions, compromises, they'll never be considered because that would just rob these politicians of their stages. And the more we as voters tie our identities up with politics and politicians, it reaches a point that we can't even separate how we define ourselves from very specific viewpoints of the problems. And at that point, if we're presented with new evidence or even just different proposals, instead of reacting with logic and critical thinking and hopefully a touch of empathy, we feel like our very identities are under attack. And when that happens, our emotions go through the roof. We'll do anything at that point, from ignoring basic evidence, clinging to what is clearly propaganda, demonizing anyone who doesn't completely agree with us, even sacrificing our own morals and principles. Because at that point, protecting our identities that we've now projected onto this politician takes precedence over everything, ourselves, our families, even our country. Once a politician becomes an extension of your identity, they own you. They own you. And I should point out here that separating your identities from the problems in front of you, it's not the same as sacrificing the morals and principles that are core to your character. That's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking, or what I'll suggest, is that keeping your identity and emotions out of it is one of the most important things you can do to make sure you stay true to your morals and principles while you work through the most stressful problems in your life, while you're scrolling social media, And will you weigh every word from some politician's mouth? To put all of this into perspective, when you combine identities, social media, and politics, you've got a perfect storm for ensuring none of the problems facing us ever get resolved. For any of you still wondering, we never even found the guy we drove out looking to fight that night. That was never our real goal anyway. We were just looking for any excuse to remind the world that we were ready and willing to fight. Taking the time to collect evidence or actually think through the problem would have distracted us from that. And the thing I would ask all of you to remember is that every guy in the car with me that night was then, and to this day still is, a good-hearted, smart, hardworking guy. And we had the best of intentions every minute of that night. But good intentions do not offset poor reasoning and worse actions. And we let our identities hijack our thinking that night, and we damn near became the bad guys in the story. So if we want to finally start resolving the biggest problems in our jobs, our personal lives, and especially our nation, then all of us have got to start separating our identities from the problems in front of us. If we don't, those problems will become nothing more than stages for drama. We will continuously overlook simple solutions while making the original problems even worse, creating all new problems for ourselves, and without even knowing it, even the best of us can end up desperately trying to justify and build up excitement for a fight that never needs to happen.